Hello everyone. Welcome back to the late night storytelling channel of the Destroyer of Souls. As usual, today I will continue to share with all of you the true ghost stories from uncles, aunts, brothers, sisters, friends, and younger siblings sent to me from all over. In this video, we will delve into two very chilling stories from two younger siblings who have sent them to me. If the audience has any true spiritual stories of their own, their family, friends, or acquaintances, please do not hesitate to email them to me at njufeng@fenwangmedia.com. And without taking up any more of your time, let's dive into the content of today's video. The first great story about the younger sister named Yin. Yin was born in 2001 and is currently living in Saigon. Her spiritual journey began with the stories that took place in her family from the time her parents first met. Her mother, originally a Cham person, grew up in Phan Rang, while her father is from Tai Bin. The two met by chance when her father was stationed in Phan Rang, and from there, they became a married couple despite the objections from their families. Due to the lack of approval from her family, Yin's mother decided to leave home to follow her father to Bon Ma Thuot to build a new life together. It was in Bon Ma Thuot that mysterious spiritual phenomena occurred, which is considered the origin of the events that followed in Yin's life. This girl's name is Yu, and she worked as a teacher until 2002. At that time, her family arranged for her to teach at a school in a district about 60 kilometers from home. Because the school was too far away, Yu had to stay in the school's dormitory, and she only returned home once a week. Yin has heard her mother recount that the dormitory where Yu stayed used to be the home of a wealthy landowner. However, after the war, for reasons unknown, that family self-immolated. When they died in the fire, there were also workers and tenants inside the house. As a result, many ghost stories emerged about this land that the locals began to share with one another. Specifically, in the dorm room where you stayed, there were a total of 4 people. In the first few weeks, nothing strange happened, but after that, about a month later, odd events began to unfold. At first, Yi began to lose her belongings, and then on one occasion, documents on her desk were knocked down to the floor without any reason. The weather was calm, and the teaching materials were thick and heavy, so it was impossible for just a breeze to knock everything over. And right at the moment when such events were happening, you still did not feel afraid or worried. She even tried to reassure everyone that perhaps they were just overthinking or it was merely the wind. Until one evening, there were 4 people in the room, but the other 2 colleagues who were also teachers had gone to the city for professional training. That day, only Mrs. Yu and another teacher remained in the room. At that time, while Mrs. Yu was sitting and preparing lesson plans, she suddenly heard the sound of a door opening, followed by the distinct sound of it closing. Miss Yu's desk was situated very close to the entrance, and although she wasn't directly looking at the door, she still caught a glimpse of someone stepping in and then closing the door behind them. Miss Yu was certain it was one of her colleagues, so she didn't turn around to look. She just gently asked, "Have you eaten yet?" But she did not hear any response from the other person. Never mind, she was still focused. About 50 minutes later, there was a knock on the door from outside. At this moment, Yu stood up and realized that the door had been locked from the inside. So, she had no choice but to go outside to open the door. And the person knocking from outside was none other than her roommate. At that moment, Yu was stunned, thinking to herself, how strange." She then asked, I thought you were in the room earlier." Why are you standing out here now?" The other person was also very surprised and replied, I just got back after being out for a while. I couldn't open the door, so I called you to open it for me." At this point, Yu and her friends around her understood what had just happened, but she didn't want anyone to panic, so she remained silent and said nothing. That night, when everyone had gone to sleep, Yu suddenly woke up in the middle of the night. She felt her bed shaking. In the dorm room, the beds were bunk beds, and Yu was sleeping on the lower bunk. When she opened her eyes, she was shocked to see a pair of feet swinging back and forth in front of her. Looking closer, she realized that it was the feet of a child. It seemed to be sitting on the upper bunk and was dangling its 2 legs down, swinging them in front of her, in the room that originally had only 2 people, Yu and another friend. So where did this child come from at this hour? She understood that she had encountered something strange. She was very scared, not daring to scream, and even refrained from breathing too loudly. In her mind, she prayed to her ancestors, hoping for their protection because she was too frightened. Suddenly, she heard the child's voice echoing, "Mom, that lady is still awake, Mom." Hearing this, you can understand that the spirit of that child is talking about her, so she quickly closed her eyes. She pretended to be asleep, thinking to herself, "If I pretend not to see anything and just keep my eyes closed, it should be fine. It should be fine." Even though she thought that way, sweat continued to pour down her like a shower. The room at that moment was not cold at all, but the atmosphere was chilling, making her shiver. She tried to endure the feeling of her heart pounding, the fear gradually taking over, waiting for a long time until she decided to open her eyes. She believed that the spirits had disappeared. She could no longer feel anything around her. Everything was silent, as a grave without any sound at all. But just as you opened her eyes, a horrifying scene struck her. In front of her was a woman with disheveled hair, her head tilted backwards. It looked as though she was sitting above and letting her head hang down, with a mouth stretched into a wide grin from ear to ear, her eyes staring intently at you. She said, "I know you're still awake. I know you're still awake." After that, she laughed, a very eerie smile that terrified everyone. You felt her heart stop and nearly fainted right on the spot. She immediately passed out until the next morning. That morning, her roommate woke her up, inviting her to have breakfast. At that moment, Yu was still in a daze, imagining the scene from the night before, when someone hung their head down from the top bunk and wore such a creepy smile. Who wouldn't be scared? She was in a state of panic and quickly rushed outside without even brushing her teeth or washing her face. Once she was sitting in the breakfast shop, she calmed down and recounted the terrifying story that had happened the night before to her roommate. Afterwards, she even called her uncle of Yin to share the creepy experience she had just gone through. There is a story like this. Once, there was a woman named Yu who was very approachable, wearing a special necklace. It was a type of necklace that held spiritual significance, similar to those worn by the Kin ethnic group. It could be a necklace with the image of a Lokateshvara, a cross, or other religious symbols associated with Buddhism or Christianity. You also had such a necklace, but it held meaning according to the culture of the Cham people, primarily to ward off evil spirits. However, when interacting with others at school, she encountered unpleasant situations. She recounted that there were some people around her who, upon learning she was Cham, spread rumors and spoke ill of her. They assigned negative characteristics to her, discriminating against her simply because they saw her wearing that necklace, assuming she was using charms or doing witchcraft. This made her feel very sad. Due to the difficult work environment and wanting to stabilize her job to earn a living, Yu decided to take off the necklace and left it forgotten at home. Therefore, after she removed the amulet necklace, she encountered many supernatural stories right in the dormitory. At that time, Angeng's uncle knew about it and realized that she had left the amulet necklace at home, so he scolded her a lot. He even called her father at work to tell him about her situation. Knowing that his wife was in trouble and very scared, her father asked to leave early that day, then rode his motorcycle home, personally bringing the amulet necklace to her. Because he knew his wife was extremely frightened, he did not want her to endure anymore. After putting the amulet necklace back on, everything went very smoothly. Although there were still a few supernatural occurrences, they were just minor incidents, like belongings being hidden away, and there were no longer any frightening events as before. In 2004, Mrs. Yu was officially employed in the city, which allowed her to no longer be away from home. At that time, her family also began to become more prosperous. From having to rent a house in a collective housing area, they were able to buy land and build their own home in a crowded residential area in the city. Because of this change, Yin's parents became the target of envy from many people. Yin's father, Mr. Huang, was straightforward and came from a military background, which made him less skilled in communication. During his work, he inadvertently offended a powerful and wealthy individual. As a result, he was falsely accused, and even though he knew he was not at fault, he felt helpless in clearing his name due to being in a weaker position. After being falsely accused, Mr. Huang's family encountered many difficulties, to the point where they had to sell their house and took on a substantial debt. Once, while driving Yin down the road, Mrs. Yu took a wrong turn onto an unfamiliar street where there was no one around to ask for directions. Despite not knowing the way, she did not turn back, but continued to drive straight ahead. Perhaps it was because her mind was troubled by her family's situation, facing financial hardship and being falsely accused of embezzling public funds. The turmoil in her heart compelled her to keep driving without looking back. On the way, Miss Yu accidentally spotted an old shrine by the side of the road. Since it looked quite worn down, she stopped her bike and took her daughter inside. The two of them only stood at the edge to look in without actually entering the worship area, so they didn't know what deity was being honored there. Miss Yu prayed while crying, asking for her family to be safe from calamities, to be free from debt, and to have the opportunity to rise up. She even promised that if her wishes were granted, she would return to express her gratitude and make offerings. After finishing her prayer, the two of them went back the way they came. Fortunately, they found their way out and returned home safely. Since visiting that shrine, things gradually began to improve. Uncle Huang was exonerated, but he was transferred to work in Saigon. At that time, he also had to go on many business trips, so he rarely returned home. As for Miss Yu, having just gone through financial struggles, she worked very hard. She was always busy. Aside from her teaching hours at school, she also took on tutoring jobs. Her family rented a place in District 3, but she often taught as far away as the Duck, Hakman, and District 12, and every day she would come home late, often after dark. Occasionally, if she couldn't find someone to look after little Yin, she would take her along. During that tough time, it was difficult for the family, but it also left her and little Yin with many cherished memories. When she was in 3rd grade, her family became more affluent, and her parents were able to build a house in Binjtan district. However, this area had many eerie spiritual stories. Her family's house was located in Bin Hung Hoa Ae, and as you may know, about 10 years ago, the security in this area was not very good and was quite chaotic. At the end of the alley, where her house was located, there was a boarding house. Most of the tenants there worked in prostitution, mainly young women in that trade. At the time her family was prospering, her parents decided to rent that boarding house to start a business. However, the prostitutes had been tenants from the previous owner. When her family took over, their intention was to change the tenants to students to reduce the complexity of the situation. But convincing the old tenants was not easy at all. In fact, the family even had to request intervention from the police. The boarding house has a total of 14 rooms, including 6 rooms on the lower floor designed with a loft, and 8 rooms on the upper floor without lofts. After Yin's family disseminated the idea of transformation and reorganizing their belongings, most people moved to other places. However, only one room remained, stubbornly refusing to vacate despite numerous visits from the police. That room belonged to a young woman who worked in prostitution. One day, people knocked on the door of this room, but no one answered. Day after day, they noticed that this woman did not leave her room, so they decided to break the door down to check on her. As soon as the door burst open, a horrifying scene unfolded before their eyes. She had hanged herself at some point without anyone noticing. Beneath her feet lay countless layers of shed snake skin, stacked on top of each other, creating a truly terrifying sight. Needless to say, this is shocking news. At the workplace where such an incident occurred, her parents are very worried. The family's final decision was to lock that room, using it only as storage, not daring to rent it out to anyone. Since then, the room has hardly ever been opened, and everything went on normally during the initial phase. About a year later, someone from the room next to the locked room told her family that they had heard loud music playing at night. They even heard the sound of water flushing from that locked room. Hearing this, the family was concerned that there might be a water leak inside. That evening, after finishing dinner, Mrs. Yu decided to go check it out. Since the room had been locked, she had rarely opened it, partly out of fear and partly because no one had been there for a long time, so there was a lot of dust. She also suffered from rhinitis, so only Mr. Huang occasionally went up to open the door, put away things, and clean a little before locking it back up again. This time, Mrs. Yu did not go alone. A student from the next room accompanied her. When the two of them opened the door, before even turning on the light, they saw a faint shadow in the middle of the room. She reached out to flip the switch, and the lights illuminated the entire room. Both stood frozen in shock, for in the center of the room was a man hanging by the neck. His face was purple, and neither Miss Yu nor the student recognized this man, unsure how he got into the room and hanged himself there. The terrifying coincidence was that beneath the man's feet lay a lot of snake skin, just like when they found the body of the sex worker who had hanged herself in this very room before. And it goes without saying that after witnessing that scene, Mrs. Yu fainted right on the spot. Hearing the cries of the people, they called the police to investigate. But no one knew who that man was, nor why he had been able to enter that room when the door outside was still locked. There was another strange point. The room had not been occupied for a long time, yet it was clean, free of dust, as if it were being regularly swept. After a while, the identity of the man was determined, and it was concluded that he had committed suicide. However, the strange occurrences were not mentioned. After the incident, Everyone living in the boarding house became fearful and gradually moved away. It was surely a coincidence, but there must have been something related to the supernatural. Yin's family also returned the boarding house to the old owner, accepting to bear a significant loss. Later, it was said that the boarding house had been auctioned off to someone else. Yin's family lived at the beginning of the alley, while the boarding house was at the end, so from that point on, they limited their trips down there and lost interest in it. But the story doesn't end there, you guys. This girl's family has a small grocery store. Usually, when she is home alone, she only opens one window, the kind with iron bars arranged in squares. Whenever someone buys something, she hands the items through the gap in the window. She remembers that at that time, she was in the 6th grade, and she often acted as the salesperson. Everything went smoothly until one day. That day, Mrs. You came back from a school party late. She was so engrossed in watching a movie that she forgot to close the window. Normally, by around 9 p.m., she would have to lock the window, but at that moment, it was close to 10:30, nearly 11 p.m. Suddenly, an older man came by to buy a pack of Z cigarettes. She still remembers that he wasn't from the neighborhood, but his face looked very kind. She didn't know what he needed the pack of Z cigarettes for, but there was something a bit strange about his face and demeanor. When buying, she handed the pack of cigarettes to him, and he gave her a 50,000 dong note in return. He said, "All right, you keep it. No need to give change back to me." Then he borrowed a lighter from Yin. She saw with her own eyes as he took out a cigarette, lit it up, and smoked it right there. His face at that moment was very satisfied. After finishing, he gently returned the lighter to her. When you came back from the party, she also told her that a man had bought a pack of cigarettes and gave her 50,000 dong without needing change. More than 10 years ago, 50,000 dong was a significant amount of money, enough for a child to eat for nearly a whole week. Since it was late, mother and child locked up and went upstairs to sleep. The next morning, you checked the cash drawer, took it out to count how much they had sold the previous day, and checked the cash. But you see, among the money that Yin received, in addition to the regular bills, there was also an envelope of ghost money. At that moment, the two of them did not think about the spiritual aspect, but only assumed that someone was teasing Yin. Perhaps she was too sleepy at that time and accepted the money without paying attention. Until she went outside to sweep the yard, she looked toward the window and saw an entire pack of cigarettes that hadn't been opened. She brought the pack inside and showed it to her mother, recounting that the night before, bought cigarettes, and she saw him smoking right there. There was no reason for him to drop it if he still had an unopened pack like that. At this point, neither of them still considered the spiritual aspect, but both were annoyed because they felt as though someone was intentionally teasing Yin. Yin had no idea who it was, but she was pretty sure it was someone from the rental block. And you had warned that in the future, if Yin encountered the man who bought medicine at night, Yin absolutely must not sell medicine to him again. Time passed until one evening, that man came again to buy medicine, and this time it was still the pack of jet. At that moment, Aunt Yu was at home, so Yin hurriedly ran upstairs to call her mother. Mom, that man is here to buy medicine again. You should come down and see." Aunt Yu immediately went downstairs, while Yin slowly followed behind. For some unknown reason, as soon as she saw that man, Aunt Yu let out a very loud scream. Yin couldn't understand why her mother reacted that way. She saw that the man looked normal. He just looked at her, smiled, and nodded gently before turning away without saying anything. Aunt Yu trembled, speaking in a stutter. "Yin, You should close the window again." Yin could feel the fear in her mother's voice, as if she had just witnessed something very terrifying. After that, the two of them decided to go to bed early. Until the morning of the next day, when the sun had risen, Yin heard Aunt Yu calling. Aunt Yu explained that she had asked Uncle Huang why she was so scared. She said that when she went downstairs, she saw a man buying a pack of Z medicine. Do you know who that person was? It was the man who had hanged himself in the rental room years ago, when the couple was still renting that row of rooms. At this point, Aunt Yu realized that the ghost of that man had returned, but she did not understand why he was scaring her. She knew it was a spiritual matter, so she went downstairs and told the new landlord of the row of rooms about the story from years past. She requested that he perform some rituals or do something to resolve the situation, but still did not comprehend why it had happened this way. When hearing this story, Yin felt as if she had encountered that man before, had even been in close contact with him, and had received money from his ghost. As a result, she developed a high fever, felt sluggish, and fell seriously ill, needing to stay bedridden. Furthermore, she even had a dream in which she saw that man come to buy medicine, but her mother was the one selling it. She stood behind her mother and kept shouting, "Mom, that is not a person!" Immediately, she was startled awake, feeling very exhausted. She lay there for about 3 to 4 days, gradually feeling better. Also, fearing that their daughter might be disturbed by that ghost again, her parents decided not to sell groceries anymore. They warned Yin, "You must never open the window when you are alone in the house." Then, gradually, everyone began to forget about it. During that 6th grade year, Mrs. You became pregnant and had a difficult delivery, but fortunately, both mother and child were healthy. However, after giving birth to the baby, her family fell into their most challenging period. About 3 months after giving birth, she began to experience chest pain. When she went to the hospital for a checkup, the doctor diagnosed her with a blocked milk duct due to frequently breastfeeding on one side, which led to blockage on the other side. Initially, everyone thought it was a minor issue, nothing serious. But as time went on, Mrs. Yu's pain worsened and unusual bruises began to appear. When she returned to the hospital for a follow-up, her baby boy Yin's brother was already 5 months old. Unfortunately, the doctor discovered that Miss Yu had breast cancer, rather than just a blocked milk duct as initially diagnosed. The family received the bad news, and everyone felt a deep gloom. The family's finances quickly depleted as they spent everything on her treatment. What's more, unfortunate is that by the time the illness was discovered, the cancer had metastasized to many parts of her body. In the end, the family decided to take Miss Yu back to Fan Rang, close to her grandparents, so they could take better care of her in the time she had left. Yin's parents sold their house in Saigon, and the 3 of them moved back to her maternal hometown to live and study, while her father stayed in Saigon. Uncle Huang continued with his work, and everyone was very fond of Aunt Yu due to her kind-hearted nature. When she fell ill, everyone feared that she would become despondent, so they frequently visited her, gathering for meals to encourage her to cheer up. That year, when Yin was in the 8th grade, Aunt Yu's illness gradually improved, bringing joy and optimism to everyone. However, the family still devoted their efforts and spent generously to ensure she could receive complete treatment. Through the introduction of acquaintances, the family learned about a doctor in Singapore, and they placed great hopes on her recovery. She was taken to Singapore for treatment, and the happiness was overwhelming when the doctor confirmed that the tumor was no longer present. However, Just a few weeks after returning home, her body began to turn yellow unexpectedly, including her eyes. Upon a follow-up examination, the family discovered that she had metastasized to the liver, with cancer at the final stage. That was also the moment when all hope for the family seemed to come to an end. At that time, Mrs. Yu was lying on the hospital bed, sometimes awake, sometimes in a daze. This was also the moment when everyone in the family heard her recount a spiritual event. Do you remember the first incident when Uncle Huang was wrongly accused during his wandering? At that time, Yu and her younger brother Yin had gone to a temple where she cried and prayed in Buonmothuat. She prayed for her family to be safe from disasters, avoiding all misfortunes and hardship. A few years later, when the family moved to Bintan district and their lives became more prosperous, she decided to return to Buonmothuat to offer thanks. However, despite her efforts to search, she could not find that temple again. The temple seemed to have vanished into thin air, completely disappeared, or existed in a realm that she could not reach. Even though she asked people around her, no one knew anything about that temple. Until she went to get medicine in Shaodok. The family had tried everything as nobody gave up hope. When there is illness, one prays in all directions. The family combined Eastern medicine, Western medicine, and even spiritual rituals. Whoever was skilled, they took her to see. During one accidental occasion, they met a shaman. The shaman said that many years ago, this girl might have made a promise to a demon. Thinking it over, she recalled that she had once prayed in a shrine, but she didn't know what deity was worshipped there. Yin's mother recounted that the shaman said it wasn't a deity, but a powerful demon. What it wanted was her life, and that was also the reason why you could never find that shrine again to repay the offering. It was as if she had been forced to promise by the demon, which had imposed upon her life. Yin, although she had witnessed that shrine, was too young to remember the way or any details at all. The shocking story. As you know, it is clear that both mother and daughter had gone up to the temple together. But on that occasion, when she returned to the temple, it seemed to exist in another realm. After hearing this story, the family decided to invite a master to investigate the matter. The family sought many masters, but none could provide assistance. Finally, a master from the Chan tradition, who specializes in Buddhist teachings, came to observe and discovered the issue. He revealed that there was a demon that had cultivated for a very long time, and even he did not possess enough spiritual power to subdue it. Even more strangely, despite modern medical technology today, Miss Yu regularly underwent health checkups, yet no one detected that she had metastasized to the liver, even reaching the advanced stage. This is something that can only be explained by spiritual factors. Shortly after, Mother Yin's health continued to deteriorate. Yin's younger brother was only 3 years old at the time. Miss Yu was a very gentle and kind teacher, but she passed away on November 23, Vietnam Teachers' Day. This is a very sad story of the Yin family. She shared this story, and afterwards, she and everyone else met with her mother to talk about spiritual matters. However, she promised to share more with me and everyone else through an email later. This concludes the first major story. Now, let's move on to the second major story. This story is about a younger sibling named Yan, who currently lives in the South. The following spiritual events are based on what Yan heard from family members. First of all, she would like to mention her grandmother. Her grandmother is now over 80 years old. When she was younger, she lived in the north with her children. When Jan's father was 20 years old, the whole family moved down to the south. She has 6 children, including a deceased eldest uncle who passed away when he was still a child. BNIKRANBNA go ICABCMTCNN Guy NC Trui N IUI INJ Yo EAB the KHNC 2EVY CIV AK ABL IKHLH CBIT BNN Go ICA BC MTN NGI CKHN Eng XEM TIRT DNI NYSN Peach ABC HNVNTC Haifong the YTAICAGINHPA Nam UINH MUA the NGIUK Thy R MCD KH NGAEC VIOT SVCU Thai INBENINIV INJO IBC QC SNKH KHN by NDE the IMNY BLM PT Than VN BGIL PT Than VNCY The LN Chu Chien 18V Chien 2 Beton MISNJ Ban NY B Ray PYIV TAPE TPA GC DBMCAB VINH ENZGAU GRI FSHI NGC Gile and Gen J Chi NBC CMTMDU NHRU NKHRN Ben UMI CHUENV NB Ange The Eng Nage and RI NMTM Kia. Grandma, as usual, went to the fields to transplant the rice seedlings. She recounted that night. The sky was clear, the moon wasn't very bright, and since the village was poor, there wasn't much light from lamps or torches. Grandma went out to the fields with 2 friends because she didn't dare go alone. She believed in ghosts and was very afraid, so she invited her 2 friends, Mrs. N and Mrs. Bai, to come along. The 3 of them chatted cheerfully along the way to forget their fears. By the time they reached the fields, all 3 saw a girl in the distance also transplanting rice seedlings. Grandma said this girl seemed to be about her age, or the same age as Grandma. She wore a bright-colored blouse that stood out among the browns and earthy tones of the older women. Her hair was braided into a long braid. What was strange was that Grandma couldn't see the girl's face because she was bent over, busy transplanting the seedlings. Grandma and her 2 friends saw this scene and found nothing alarming, so they continued with their work. While pulling up vegetables, the 3 elderly women were chatting animatedly and laughing with one another. Suddenly, one of the women Grandma and expressed her desire to strike up a conversation with a girl nearby who was working alone. Grandma noticed that the girl seemed to be diligently working by herself, looking somewhat lonely, and thought it would be nice to get acquainted. She lifted her head and called out loudly, "Hey, why are you out in the field all alone? Where's your family? Why isn't anyone helping you?" However, in response to Grandma Ann's words, there was nothing but silence from the girl. Grandma Ann called again, "Miss." Right after that, my grandmother, Grandma Yan, also lifted her head and noticed the girl standing upright. The girl still had her back turned to the 3 women, but began to slowly rotate until she fully faced Grandma Yan. As soon as she clearly saw the girl's face, Grandma Yan felt as if she were rooted to the spot in the rice field, unable to move. For the moment, she saw that the girl's face was completely white, but lacked features: no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a lifeless white void. At that moment, Mrs. N was so scared that she screamed loudly, crying out, "A ghost! Oh my God, a ghost! A ghost! A ghost!" Mrs. B was also panic-stricken and dashed straight home in a hurry. As for Jan's grandmother, she stood rooted to the spot, her eyes wide open, unable to move. However, she recounted that the woman did nothing at all, only turned her face to look, and then continued bowing her head down to pull the rice seedlings. At that moment, everyone was frozen in place, trying to keep calm. Once they regained their composure, Jan's grandmother pulled Mrs. Ann and hurriedly took her straight home, leaving behind the unfinished tasks. After that night, Mrs. Ann had a high fever and couldn't say anything anymore. On the other hand, Mrs. B never dared to go out to harvest rice seedlings at night anymore. As for Jan's grandmother, due to her family's extreme poverty, she still had to go out to harvest rice seedlings at night. However, she always invited more people to go with her, and from those subsequent trips, she no longer saw the ghostly figure of that woman. Time passed for a very long while, and after getting married, Jan's grandmother gave birth to 4 sons and 2 daughters. Among the 4 sons, Jan's father was the 3rd son, counting from the youngest. When Jan's father was about 7 or 8 years old, his eldest brother passed away, meaning Jan's paternal uncle. Jan's grandmother recounted that the death of the uncle seemed to have been foretold. That day, Jan's grandfather took the uncle to the pond behind the house to fetch straw for the kitchen, while also watering the garden and catching chickens to prepare for dinner. At that time, the eldest uncle was sitting on the shore, while the grandfather went down to the pond to scoop up water for watering the vegetables. While he was busy doing that, as he filled a bucket with water, a snakehead fish jumped up onto the bank. In that moment, the grandfather didn't notice, but the eldest uncle picked up the fish and shouted loudly. He called out, "Dad, this fish jumped onto the bank." The uncle asked to bring the fish into the house to cook soup. However, the grandmother had a belief that a fish jumping out of the water was an omen. The grandfather himself was gentle and cared deeply for his sons, but fearing that the grandmother would find out and scold him, he did not allow the eldest uncle to bring the fish home. When they entered the house, the uncle relayed the story of the fish jumping onto the bank to the grandmother, who then told him that the eldest uncle was born under an unfavorable sign with water, and that he should avoid going near rivers and lakes. The grandmother firmly believed that the incident of the fish jumping onto the bank was certainly an ill omen related to water concerning the eldest uncle. A few days later, she kept the little girl inside the house, not allowing her near the pond anymore. However, it seemed that everything was a bad omen, as shortly after, her uncle suddenly passed away. The reason for his death was because he ate a cassava root. It may sound unreasonable, but he passed away exactly 1 month after the incident with the fish. From then on, the whole family decided not to let the children bathe in the river or stream anymore. She did not mention how old her uncle was when he died, but her father told her that he was around 45 to 50 years old, only because of eating a cassava root. Henceforth, the paternal side of the family also forbade their children from eating cassava, believing that it was a bad omen. Time went by until a few years after her grandfather passed away. At that time, her youngest aunt had grown up. Her grandmother and her children decided to move to the south to live. There, her grandmother bought a fairly large piece of land. As of now, the area of the land is big enough to form a small hamlet. She divided the land among her 3 sons, each receiving a piece. She also built houses for her sons when they got married so that they could reunite and live close to each other along with their children. The family's life began to stabilize from that point on, and everyone remained there, together weathering the happy and sad memories of the past. Jan's father, being the youngest son, was given 2 plots of land by his grandmother. However, later on, he donated 1 plot to Uncle Ba so that he could build his own business. In terms of arrangement for easier visualization, Uncle Ba's house is built in an L shape, similar to 2 sides of a rectangle. Jan's house is also in an L shape, but it occupies the remaining part, so when the 2 houses are placed together, they form a complete rectangle. Behind Uncle Ba's house, Uncle Hai built his own home. Interestingly, next to Uncle Hai's house, there appears to be a pond. This pond, although not very deep, is quite wide. Grandma said that this pond cannot sustain fish. If you pump water in and release fish, they will all die within a month and the water will drain completely. In general, this pond seems to carry some strange foreboding. More importantly, ever since moving to this land, there has already been a tombstone right at the edge of the pond. At that time, Uncle Hai did not know much about the things around his house, as he worked as a train driver and rarely returned home. The grave I want to talk about is located with its back to Uncle Ba's business. One night, while Uncle Ba was sleeping, he dreamed of a man coming in from outside. The man told him that he needed to build a temple for him, and in return, he would bless Uncle Ba's business. At that moment, Uncle Ba had just finished building his business, so he was a bit surprised and asked back, "Hey, I just built this place, but I don't see where you are. So why do you want me to build a temple for you?" The man replied, "It's right behind your house. Just look for it, and you will find it." The next morning, Uncle Ba recounted the story to Grandma. After listening, Grandma went to investigate and noticed a small grave right on the edge of the pond next to Uncle Hai's house. She and Uncle Ba invited a priest to perform a ceremony and build a small shrine. From then on, Uncle Ba's business prospered immensely, flourishing without pause. People said that Uncle Ba had built several houses and bought 2 or 3 cars in a very short time. Grandma also revealed that the person buried in that grave was very sacred, but when she inquired of the local priest, no one knew exactly when that person had died. The next family member was Uncle Hai, whose temperament was generous, but rather stingy. He had been through 4 wives. Fortunately, he had children, especially a son. With his first wife, he had a son named Tuan, the first grandson of the family line. Since Uncle Ba had passed away, Grandma had a lot of affection for Tuan. However, Tuan had a rift with his father, which often led to conflicts between the two. When Uncle Hai still lived in the ancestral house, Tuan never agreed to return. It was only after Uncle Hai married his 4th wife and moved to another place that Tuan returned to the house on that piece of land to live and take on the responsibility of caring for the ancestral home, fulfilling the role of a first grandson in the family. After the photo was moved there, Mr. Tuan became the head of a southern branch of a pharmaceutical company. He didn't hold back at all, you know. Rumor has it that when he moved in, he knocked down the gate of the house to make space for parking his car. He also moved the altar for the earth god to a corner of the house to stack his company's goods. Grandma didn't know what was going on until the incident happened. She scolded him a lot. On the very first night after moving in, believe it or not, right after he moved the altar for the earth god and the god of wealth to a dark corner, he went to sleep. As soon as he fell asleep, he was immediately visited by sleep paralysis. He recounted that he saw two men standing at his bedside. One spoke with a northern accent, wearing a shirt and dress pants. The other man was blurry and shadowy, his face unrecognizable. Both of them pulled at his arms and legs, scolding him, saying, "You dare to move the altar for the earth god into the corner? Doing that is equivalent to inviting ghosts and spirits into the house." And until morning, his friends finally endured that feeling from the night before. Only when the sun was about to rise could he loosen his body, escaping the fear after a long night. Immediately, he ran to his grandmother's house. After hearing the story, his grandmother thought to herself that the two people could be one of them his grandfather, and the other might be the spirit of the man at the little shrine that Uncle Ba had built next to the lake. Knowing for sure this was a spiritual matter, she hastily invited a master to set up the altar for the earth god again. She also mentioned a little about this piece of land, that it was very vast and sacred. At that time, around the year 2000, when his parents had just gotten married, his mother was quite superstitious, afraid of ghosts, and when she gave birth to him, he would cry incessantly at night, only crying during the dark hours. His mother was very worried, so she went to consult a master. On the first day meeting the master, she said something very special. "You go home and wait. When your child starts to cry, you go to the kitchen. At the corner of the kitchen, you will see a stone spinning. If so, the next day you come back here. I will show you the next steps." Hearing that, Jan's mother obediently followed the instructions. As soon as the baby cried, she went to the kitchen and saw a stone exactly like what the shaman had described. The stone began to rotate on its own, my friends. The next day, the mother went back to see the shaman again. The shaman said, "Now you go home, light an incense stick. After that, place a bowl of water on the altar of the kitchen god. You don't need any charms. When the incense burns out, take that bowl of water down and give it to your child to drink. They will stop crying immediately." Following the instructions, Jan's mother went home and did exactly as advised. As a result, the baby stopped crying completely, and from then on, there were no more night disturbances, my friends. After Jan, the mother had 3 more small children, all of whom cried at night. Each time this happened, she used this method to resolve the issue, and it worked every single time. Next, she had 2 more encounters with Jan's grandfather, who was also her father-in-law. To elaborate on him, he passed away quite early when Jan's youngest aunt was only about 3 or 4 years old. He died due to stomach illness, so Jan's mother naturally never got to meet him. She recalls the first time she met him was during Jan's first birthday celebration. Since Jan was the first daughter of her father, it was likely that he came to visit his grandchild. She recounted that night, while lying in bed, she suddenly woke up in surprise. She saw a figure standing outside the door. She couldn't see the face clearly, but was certain it was the silhouette of a man. The figure just stood there, looking at the little child who was lying next to her. The next morning, when she shared this story, everyone in the family said it was probably just the grandfather visiting his grandchild and that there was nothing to worry about. The story has been rewritten in a coherent and easy-to-understand manner. After Jan was born, it wasn't until 9 years later that her mother gave birth to Jan's younger brother. Being from the north, the paternal family placed great importance on male offspring. When they learned that the baby was a boy, the entire family was overjoyed and excited. When the pregnancy reached about 7 months, after an ultrasound confirmed the baby was a boy, Jan's mother invited a shaman to perform a ceremony to announce the news to their grandfather. At that time, Jan was around the 5th or 6th grade, so she was aware of what was happening. She stood beside the family altar and listened as her mother and the shaman conversed. The shaman lit incense at the altar for her grandfather, and with her own eyes, Jan saw the incense ash curl up into the shape of a star. She called it a star shape, though she couldn't clearly imagine what it looked like for the ash to curve into a star. Afterward, the shaman smiled and told Jan's mother that their grandfather down below was very happy. Until she gave birth to her son, a few weeks later, the doctors at the hospital allowed her to go home. On the very first day, she saw her father-in-law return. He stood outside the curtain, merely looking inside. However, he stood a little closer, perhaps because he had heard from the family that the newborn baby boy bore an uncanny resemblance to him. Therefore, he gazed a bit longer. She recounted that, although she couldn't clearly see his face or figure, she had the feeling that the person was smiling. In the end, he vanished. Besides, Jan's mother, Jan's second younger sister, also claimed to have seen their grandfather, but she hadn't seen him as clearly as their mother. Back then, the 3 of us sisters shared a room. The house was quite small, with only a wide hallway connecting the living room to the kitchen. Both bedrooms were built right off the hallway, much like a corridor. Our room was the one closest to the living room, while our parents' room was nearer to the kitchen. This meant that to get from the living room to the kitchen, you had to walk past both bedrooms. Our bedroom door was made of stainless steel with a section of frosted glass. That night, I still remember it vividly. It was the 28th of Tet, in the year of the dog, though I can't recall which year it was. I don't know why, but on that night, my second sister couldn't sleep and kept tossing and turning, saying she felt scared for no reason. She lay there, looking out the door for a while, and claimed to have seen a shadow moving from the living room towards the back. The frosted glass door only partially obscured the view, but she still managed to see it. She insisted she wasn't mistaken because the shadow glided by very slowly, very slowly. As for me, I'm someone who struggles to sleep and is also afraid of ghosts. So after hearing her story, I lay there under the covers, too scared to move. But my little sister kept shaking me, saying, "Oh my God, someone just walked past the door, sis." Hearing that made me feel cold all over. At first, I wanted to calm down and reassure myself. I thought it must have been Dad, because he often went over to Uncle Ba's house to drink and chat with Grandma. It was normal for him to come home late in the evening and pass by here. But then I started to think again. Right next to my bedroom, close to the living room, there is a coat hook. Every time Dad comes back from somewhere, he usually hangs his jeans and jacket on that hook, and at the same time, he hooks the bunch of keys in the place where people often thread their belts through. The first sound I always hear when Dad comes home late is the sound of the gate opening, then the sound of the front door opening, and then comes the clinking of the keys as Dad hangs up his clothes. But this time, after my younger sibling told me someone had walked past the bedroom door, gliding right by, I didn't hear any sounds at all, no gate opening, no front door opening, and no clinking of keys. I just mentioned that, although I am the most afraid of ghosts in the house, I couldn't understand why, at that moment, I felt incredibly curious. She immediately suggested to her little sister to crack the door open to see what was outside. Strangely, that day, the younger sister was quite brave, so the 2 of them gently opened the door and peeked their heads outside. Surprisingly, as soon as she poked her head out, the younger sister turned pale and stammered, "No one is out there." They quickly pulled their heads back in, jumped onto the bed, wrapped themselves up in the blanket, and slept until morning. The next morning, the two sisters recounted the story to their mother. After hearing it, their mother casually replied, "It's probably because it's Tet. Your grandpa came back to visit. There's nothing to be afraid of." Both sisters froze, unable to say a word. Previously, whenever she told ghost stories, their mother always scolded them and insisted that there were no ghosts. Yet this time, their mother said that Grandpa came back to visit, leaving both sisters surprised and confused. And most recently, just before I sent an email to the Destroyer of Souls, my grandmother, during her visit to our new house, shared the following story. Previously, at the back door of Uncle Ba's house, there was a plum tree that had been there for a long time. Usually, Uncle Bo and my father would sit under that plum tree to drink and eat. However, recently, Uncle Ba suddenly uprooted that plum tree and brought it home to plant a sapodilla tree instead. The family and folk belief in my hometown state that the sapodilla tree is filled with spirits and ghosts. My grandmother recounted that even though the branches of the sapodilla tree had been cut off, it still emanated a gloomy aura. My grandmother believes in ghost stories and is aware of the beliefs surrounding the sapodilla tree. Standing at the front door, her eyes gazing at the sapodilla tree, she idly thought that she would ask Uncle Ba to bring 5 nails to hammer into the trunk of that sapodilla tree as a way to suppress the spirits. After all, Uncle Ba's family is also engaged in business. That night, while Grandma was sleeping, she had a dream. She saw 4 young women. 3 stood in front of her, while 1 was beside her. She noticed that the one next to her was dressed very elegantly, a tucked-in shirt and wearing a pair of earrings, looking very noble. But what was more important were the 3 young women sitting in front of Grandma. They were heating a pan in their hands. At that moment, Grandma was holding a baby. She didn't know whose child it was, but the baby was pressing its back against her stomach. Its limbs flailed wildly, struggling as if it was enduring something. The 3 young women continued to heat the pan and then stood up to press the hot pan against the child's body. The woman beside Grandma remained silent, not saying anything at all. In her dream, Grandma panicked and shouted, "Sister, why are you doing this? You're burning my baby." And I recounted that, just as she finished speaking, the person sitting in the middle, among the 3 who were on the grill, suddenly lifted the pan and pressed it flat against the child's body. This person was wearing a faded maroon shirt, and their face was indistinct. The hot pan pressed against her caused Enai to feel a burning sensation, as if the pain were touching her armpit. Although it was merely a dream, the pain felt all too real, causing Enai to jolt awake. Upon waking, I could still feel the searing pain right under her armpit, which frightened her. As she recounted her experience, I too felt an uncomfortable sensation, as if my armpit were slightly aching. After she woke up, I reflected on the strange dream and sensed something was amiss, especially since the atmosphere in the house was already tense due to her discontent with her daughter-in-law, the wife of BCB. Therefore, I was certain that this was not an ordinary matter. She decided to speak with the father of Yan, asking him to find a way to suggest to BCB and his wife to invite a shaman to resolve this issue. Enai insisted that bringing a shaman in for an exorcism was necessary, as encountering such matters during business dealings could turn problematic. And here we come to the end of the entire second big story, as well as the end of today's video. First of all, I would like to thank Yin and Yan for sending in 2 very interesting and spooky emails. Thank you everyone for listening to me until now. If you love me and want to support me, as a way to thank Yin and Yan, don't hesitate to hit the like, share, and most importantly, click on the subscribe button. Please hit the bell icon next to it to receive notifications and leave your comments below to increase interaction with the channel. As I have shared in previous clips, recently, the framing in the video has been adjusted so that I sit further away from the screen, allowing everyone to clearly see my head, neck, and hands. This framing is quite similar to the storytelling framing of old. I wonder how you all feel about it. Is it pleasing to the eye? Or do you prefer the previous framing when I sat closer to the screen, only showing my head? If you have any suggestions or want me to adjust anything further, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you all very much. Dear ladies and gentlemen, friends, and younger siblings, if anyone has any true spiritual stories from themselves, their family members, acquaintances, or friends, please do not hesitate to email them to destroyerofsouls@njufeng@fenquanganidia.com. Additionally, you can also send them to me via fan page or my personal Facebook. I would like to make a small request. If any of you, the audience listening to the Destroyer of Souls channel who work in the field of sound, could offer assistance, I would greatly appreciate it. Currently, I have tried adjusting the sound during recording. In the past, I would usually finish recording and leave it as it is, rarely making edits. However, recently, the editor suggested that I send the audio file for her to help edit. But since she is not a sound specialist, when I listened back, I honestly was not completely satisfied. Therefore, if there are any audience members who specialize in sound and can provide guidance, I would love for you to reach out to me via fan page or personal Facebook to help me adjust the sound of my voice. I want to bring my audience the most polished and complete product, removing any background noise, as well as environmental sounds. I have invested quite a bit in microphones and other equipment, but perhaps due to my lack of knowledge on optimization, I still feel that the sound is lacking. If possible, I would like to invite you all for a coffee, a meal, or some drinks to express my gratitude and learn more. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.